Good evening. My name is Erik Flesch, and I am the director of the Mining and Rollo-Jameson Museums. And welcome to this 6th of 7 presentations as part of the 2022 Winter Lyceum. Today is the 27th day of March 2022, and I'm broadcasting from Platteville, Wisconsin, home of the world's largest letter M on beautiful Platte Mound in the heart of the upper Mississippi Valley lead and zinc mining region where the Badger State was born. Reflecting on a wonderful year behind us, the museum campus celebrated 3 milestone anniversaries last year. Founded in 1965 by the city of Platteville, 2021 marked the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Mining Museum, the 45th anniversary of the opening of the Bevins Mine in the museum's backyard, and the 40th anniversary of the opening of the Rollo-Jameson Museum in Platteville. And we've got many programs and initiatives in store for this special new year that celebrate 13,000 years of human ingenuity, inquiry, enterprise, and development. What might be called the pioneering spirit in the context of our unique driftless area landscape. And I invite you to stay up to date on these programs, as well as to make your reservations and to support current initiatives online at www.mining.jameson.museum. It's my great pleasure to welcome you this evening to enjoy a presentation by Dr. Nancy von Meyer titled Geographic Information Systems in the Tri-State Area's Upper Mississippi Valley Mining District. I'd like to thank all of you who have registered to participate live today, as well as those who may be watching a recording of this event from our library of virtual programs. I extend a warm welcome to current friends of the Mining and Rollo-Jameson Museum's members and donors, and I'd like to thank the sponsors whose financial support has made this program possible. A&W Restaurant of Platteville, Claire Bank, Edward Jones Financial Advisor Bob Hundhausen, FEH Design, H&R Block, Inspiring Community, State Farm Agent Jordan Holthouse, and our media sponsor, Voice of the River Valley magazine. And now, before we begin our program, I'd like to invite you to participate in a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Because we are a group of 131 and we are doing this via Zoom, in the interest of time, I'd like to invite you to type out your questions as they come to mind and to submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen during the talk. So this is a great time to take a quick moment to look for that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And at the end, Dr. von Meyer will answer as many of the questions as she's able in the order in which they are received. So I'm pleased now to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Nancy von Meyer is a professional land surveyor and a GIS professional, as well as a professional engineer. And Dr. von Meyer lives in Pendleton, South Carolina, where she's president of Fairview Industries. Fairview specializes in land records information system and developing sustainable partnerships and collaborations for shared data stewardship. But Dr. von Meyer was born and raised here in Platteville, Wisconsin, and earned her Bachelor's of Science in Mining Engineering from the UW Platteville between 1972 and 1977. During an exciting time here at the Platteville Mining Museum, she worked here for several years giving tours and helping to display some of the displays and dioramas. Dr. von Meyer came to GIS through the graduate program there at the UW-Madison when she was finishing her master's in mining engineering there, and then switched to civil and environmental engineering for her PhD. Dr. von Meyer is a nationally recognized leader in land records and use of cadastral information for decision support. She's been at Fairview Industries since 1983 and more than 40 years of GIS system design and implementation experience. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nancy von Meyer.
Hi, Erik. Good to see you. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. Share my desktop here. So it's good to be here. Erik, thanks for putting these on and for the sponsors for sponsoring them. I think the virtual meeting is a great way to spread the word of the Mining Museum and the good work that's going on in Platteville and in all the historic activities in town. It's great. Many of you might know me as Nancy Robertson. That's what I was known as my name when I was in Platteville. I've been in Pendleton since about 2000, maybe 2001. Can't remember exactly, but that time frame. but my heart is still with the Badgers. So when the basketball games come up, I'm still a Badger. What I'd like to talk to about a little bit today is Erik and I talked about this a little bit last year about how to kind of share with you, because a lot of you do a lot of your own historical research, and there's just an innate curiosity that people have that are involved in the Mining Museum and in history in general. And what I want to do is just share with you some of the things I've learned and some of the things I've found that relate to maps and mining, maps related to mining, and maps generally related to historical exploration of Southwest Wisconsin and any place else you may find yourself. We've got, what I want to do is I'm going to just generally go through kind of what a GIS is. And I know this will be a review for some of you, and for some of you it might be like, I don't really care how the car works, I just want to turn the key and get it going. I understand that. But some of the principles of how a GIS work are going to affect how you use the data and the information that you find. Hold on a second, I did something I didn't mean to do. The information that you find and how you use it. So I want to go through that a little bit about parcel data, which is sort of how we own land, a little bit about the maps, maps online, what they look like, where you can find them, and then some various resources that are available to you. So maps, right? Maps are great. How many of you as kids sat down on the floor and just spent times turning the pages of the atlas, or you're on a family vacation and you know the youngest kid in the car had the map for a day and could guide the family wherever they wanted to that day, or you went into school and you could just sit and look at maps. It was wonderful. It was always a wonderful experience to spend time with a map and dream about where you could be and learn about where you were. And really the way we started drawing maps early on was, you know, we drew what we measured and we noted what we saw. So it was a real journal of our location. Where had we been and what had we found and what did we see? And we made notes of it as we did it, and some of it was done to scale, meaning that it was measured. You could measure along the map and see distances. In other cases, the maps were just pure artwork. Maps as cartography. Cartography as artwork is becoming much more common now. And I always liked these old maps. I thought they were just fascinating. The things that people chose to put on the map were the things that they ran across that they felt were important at that time. It tells us a lot about what was important to the early explorers and the early mappers. And of course, one of the most infamous, in my opinion, cartography relics available to us is the Chandler map. And Erik has this at the Mining Museum. It's printed on parchment. It's a beautiful map that illustrates a cartographer's image of what they saw in Southwest Wisconsin at the time. And it's a fascinating map. I was always told that this map was used as a realtor's map, and that it was hawked in New York and places along the shore when people came through immigration and they were looking for where to settle in the United States. They didn't have any great ideas already. They would use these maps and say, hey, look, you can come out here and there's mining available. So if you were coming from Cornwall, England, and you were familiar with mining, then this might be an area you would want to immigrate to pick up a profession that you had from where you came. And I've always been told that the reason Milwaukee has so many Germans in it is that the original public land survey maps, or the inventory maps of Wisconsin, had noted naturally occurring hops along the Lake Michigan, and that really caught the eye of the German immigrants. It's like, ooh, hops, we can make beer. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a lovely thing to think about, that might have been, in fact, the case. But of course, as with so many things, right, even here we are sitting and doing Zoom, right? We wouldn't even have been able to do this 10, 15 years ago. Our beautiful handwritten maps are now driven by computer. And when people still make really good maps using computers, even though they don't have the romance of the pen and ink. But it's trying to be the same thing. That is, we're capturing what we measured and what we saw, only we're capturing it with a computer. And we're trying to represent that on the earth. And as so many things, the computer does what we do pretty well, but not great. So the computer has to layer things, has to put things down in a certain structure in order to be able to present them and have access to them. So you often see, when you hear GIS, you see this stacked map or the stacked representation of what's there. And it's because that's the way the information is stored in the computer program. And so what happens is you get just many layers of information and a lot of different collectors and a lot of different sources, and they pull all their information together using common reference points, those pillars, and tie things together. And the other advantage really of the computer map, as much as I miss the romance of the ancient cartography or the old cartography, is that it's tied to a database, which means that the records are tied to data, in actual databases, textual information that has much more rich, much richer environment that describes much more of what we have. And because it's tied to a database, it means that we can now query the map. So when you were a kid and you're driving in the car and your mom or dad would say, you know, Nancy, where's Highway 151? You'd have to point at the map. You'd say, it's right here on the map. But now what we do is we query the database and we say, where's Highway 151? And the database is queried, it finds all instances of 151, and then it highlights it on the map. So all of you that use your iPhone or your Android phone or your navigation system in your car, that's what you're doing, is you're entering in information you know, and it's not querying the map exactly, it's querying a database that's related to the map to find that location that you want to get to, and then using the intelligence of the GIS, the Geographic Information System, to route you between various places. So basically that's what a GIS is, and that's what I've spent my whole professional life building, are various GISs in their databases. And we could talk about this for 22 years, but we won't. But in my opinion, one of the most important layers of the GIS is the parcel data. And the parcel data, sometimes called cadastral information, is the information that represents how we have settled, how we have claimed and settled the earth. And in my opinion, I feel that the representation of how we have settled and claimed the land really says a lot about who we are. It describes how we have chosen to divide up the landscape and who lives where, and how assets are allocated. Really tells a lot about who we are as a people and what our values are. But where does all that information come from? Well, I don't know how many of you are landowners or how many of you have purchased land, but parcel data comes from, it's a record of a transaction, basically. So the transaction is between you and someone prior to you. Someone owns land and you purchase it from them, or you lease it from them, or you gain a right to that land. Maybe you gain a right to extract the minerals. Maybe you gain a right to hunt or fish, or maybe you gain a right to access or ingress or egress on that land. And whatever happens is you sit down and have a transaction with that person. And that transaction is then recorded at your county or town office. In New England, it's in the town. In the Midwest, it's in the county. And it's recorded in a title and a deed. And then that information used to be stored in well, it's probably still is stored. There are a lot of old records in Lancaster, I know, for Platteville, there are all the old deeds. And nowadays, of course, they're automated, and so they have digital signatures and they're stored in a digital environment. And the mapper takes that information and reads the legal description in the deed, and then transfers that into a map. And I know I can remember sitting in Mr. Johnson's geometry class in Platteville High School and thinking, I am never going to use this stuff. I don't understand why I even need to learn this. I should be able to be doing something else because I don't want to be sitting here learning this. But actually, all the things that we learned, all that math we learned in high school comes into play here. We use the coordinate geometry, which is the record of the bearings and distances, the directions and the length, all the way around the perimeter of our land. And the parcel mapper takes that information and translates it and turns it into lines on the map. So all those things that we learned in high school math that we really wanted to be doing something else comes into play here. It's all valuable, so that all that stuff that we didn't think we needed to know to make these maps. So that's a high level view of how we get from those written documents to the parcel map, which of course I always tell everybody, doesn't matter what you do in a GIS, at the very end of the line, what matters is who owns the land. At the end of the line, you need to know who has what rights in that piece of property. You can't make any final decisions or take any final action until you know that. But there's a little bit of things that have come along, of course, with the internet. A lot of the maps that we had, that we held in our hands, are now available online. And so it's great. All this stuff's online. Excellent. This will be awesome. But there's a couple of things I want to make sure you know about as you begin to use things online that you just need to be aware of. They're not. No, there's 1,000 nuances underneath all of this, but here's the high level stuff. You be aware of the difference between raster and vector. So those are just terms you can drop on people at a party or at a bar or something and say, what's the difference between raster and vector? But the raster is the representation of whatever it is you're seeing as a series of pixels or a series of small squares. And that's a great way to represent things. This way your camera captures things. If you're using your phone or using any kind of a digital camera, that's what it's captured as, is a raster. You'll read about the resolution of it before you buy it, or you'll see different lenses have different raster resolutions. And that's what they're trying to tell you, is how big are each of those individual squares. And that's important because that tells you about the clarity. But you've all done this. You try to zoom in on a picture and see, did Aunt Martha have glasses on in that picture? And you zoom in on the picture and then all of a sudden, boom, turns totally blurry. And that's called pixelization. So that's the resolution limit of a raster image. Any kind of a raster map. A lot of maps are actually just rasters. They're not actually lines. They're just these little squares. It's a very efficient way to store things. It's a very rapid way to store things. A lot of data is stored online that way because it's very quick. It displays on your computer very quickly. Computers love raster information. The second format is vector format, and that's the format that I'm personally most interested in, because in that case, the data are actually stored as points, lines, polygons, and volumes. So I can actually go in and begin to make measurements. I can spin it, I can rotate it, I can reproject it, I can zoom in on it, and it never pixelates. Well, it will pixelate eventually, I guess, on your screen, but the actual raw data would never pixelate. It's very accurate. So just be cognizant of when you get to a site, are they giving me raster data? Are they giving me just images? Or are they giving me actually vector data that I can actually take measurements on? The other thing you need to be cognizant of when you use maps online, or these two other things, is the disclaimer. A lot of times we just click through it. Okay, so how many of you have installed an app on your phone and it goes, I agree to the terms of service? How many of you read the terms of service? None of us read the terms of service. You just go, yeah, I accept, boom, 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 and you're off and running. And the terms of services are 300 and 400 pages long, so I understand not reading them, but much like the terms of service on an app that you would download, the disclaimers that you're going to see on these sites are important because they tell you what the fitness for use is. So I'm just going to caution you all right now, is that when you get maps online, they are not a substitute for a land surveyor. They are not a substitute for determining where the title lines are. They're intended to be a digital representation that you can use to begin to make some decisions or gain some understanding of your landscape, but it is not a substitute for actually ascertaining where things are. And we see that all the time with digital maps. People will call and go, I'm going to build a fence and I got this map offline. I put my fence in, it was on my neighbor's land. It happens every day. But it's not going to happen to you guys because you guys are too smart to make that happen. So just be cognizant of the disclaimer, the fitness for use. Second thing you want to always be cognizant of is the dates and the source. So who made that map? Like, is it a fake map or is it a real map? Did it come from an authoritative source, or is it just something somebody whacked together? Did it come from just some text information, somebody approximated things, or is it really legit? And then be aware of the dates, because just as over time our positioning has gotten so much better, so we can locate things better, because we're all walking around with computers and GPS on our phones, right? I mean, I can survey to a centimeter with my phone. That's now. But if I had collected that same information in 2000, it wouldn't have been nearly as accurate. So those are just kind of three things to just kind of, you keep those three things in mind, you're not going to get into too much trouble on using maps online. But before we get into the maps, one of the things I wanted, there's some really important documents that are based on maps that are really going to be useful, that I think are useful. One is, and I'm not really sure who maintains this website on Wisconsin Mines, but it's a really interesting website. And I'm going to try to flip here. So if I mess up here, you may or may not see it. So I guess you don't want to see my mail. So this is that publication. This is at wisconsinmines.html. This is a pretty cool website. It has some nice, as far as I've been able to tell, the writing on it is well done, and it seems to be accurate from what I know. It has some great pictures of the old time miners and the old time mines. I love the way they had everybody just line up and take their picture in front of it all in a row. Like, what were they doing there? Like, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to me. They just had all these guys stand around. It cracks me up. But it's just, it gives you a kind of a sense of what the area was like, what the conditions were like, and what just gives you a good feel for kind of what's going on. The other publication that I think is really interesting was done by a guy that I went to graduate school with, Steve Ventura, and he and I were in the GIS program at Madison at the same time. And the data that they generated for this was turned over, I think, Erik, did you say to the Southwest Planning Commission? Is that right? And I think of course, the GIS people in each of your counties, and certainly the GIS people in the city of Platteville, would have access to this raw data that Steve and his team put together. They did a really nice job with this. The emphasis of this publication was not so much on finding and discovering the old mines, but it was looking at the impact of those mines on us now. So what is the remediation impact, and what are the issues that face us in terms of, is there a mine underneath my house? Am I going to have danger of runoff? Is there going to be some sort of acidification issue? And they did a nice job on just did a really good job of mapping the locations they could find and just giving you a sense of what's there. I think this is probably, I didn't find a site that actually published this data. I only found this raster representation of the information in this publication, but I'm sure your county GIS folk or your city GIS folk could get this data for you, and you would have a more precise representation. This is a nice piece of work, very well done, and another nice thing just a document to kind of look at. What I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the federal resources, the state resources, and the local resources. So I think we're all familiar with the USGS topologic maps. These are the maps. The topo maps are the maps that the U.S. Geological Survey it's this ArcGIS.com Topo Explorer, and you type in where you want. So I typed in Platteville, where you want to look. You can also navigate there. You don't need to type it in. You can zoom in and zoom out, and I can select. So I've selected that, and then it has all the history of all the maps that have come up that have been done in that area. Of course, now it's not going to work. Come on. But what happens is that hold on a second. No. See, it's windy here today, so we may have limited internet. But what happens is you can see all of the USGS maps that happen over time in this area. And if you want to see this map, so here's the 1976 to I really want to just get this mineral point map. There we go. So I want to look at this mineral point map, and what you do is you see this little slider bar here. So this is a raster map. These are raster maps. Now remember a thing about rasters? There's going to be a quiz at the end. What's the thing about rasters? They pixelate. right? So they're not as good as the vector maps. And the way they do is they take the image of the map and then they try to geo-reference it or tie it to the places on the ground. It's not always really precise, but let's look at this this is the Mineral Point map from 1902, and we can say there it was in 1902, and then we can make that map. Whoops, I'm gonna turn this one off. Let me get rid of that one. I can make that map come in and you can see what was there then and what's there now. Now look how that pixelated, that looks really bad, right? Just because that's the difference between a raster map and a vector map. What's interesting about this is if you found something on this map and you want to know where it was today or what was there today, you can put this over the top and then you can kind of just see what's underneath it. Isn't that cool? It's pretty cool tech, isn't it? And you can see that the roads on the old map aren't registered as well as they are on the modern map. Obviously, they weren't able to survey as accurately, and the registration of this map to the current positions isn't great, but it still gives you kind of a sense of, you know, was that street here in 1902 or is it or not? So, you know, when I lived in Platteville, we lived up here on K Street, and wow, in 1902 there was nothing there, right? But now there's when you get there, well, I don't know, there's a lot of houses there now. But that's just it. So in the old days, you would buy the hard copy maps. You'd have to flip between the maps to see if you to register one to the other. And now they have them so that you can just lay one on top of the other, and using the different transparency, you can see how they register one to the other. So it's just kind of an interesting resource instead of having to cart around the hard copy. Not that carting around the maps is that hard, but it's just another resource. This is another interesting resource. This is the mineral resource data. This is, again, a federal record. They have a, oops, I'm on hard copy. So this is just a data set that was put together by the U.S. Bureau of Mines. And it just kind of shows that Erik and I were looking at this before, and this is not particularly accurate. This is based on whatever was reported in the field at the time. And we can tell it's not very accurate because we see the Bevan mine isn't even on this map as a resource under any of the records. So it's just there's nothing here for the Bevan, and we know that there's a resource there because we can go down in there. We can actually take a tour of it. But theoretically, you can click on one of these squares, and within that square, it's a pretty big square. So you can see that here again, it's a raster map with just a square printed on it, but then it's tied to this database. So we can pull up this database. It tells us whether it was the grade, remember, told us whether it was the higher the grade, the more accurate the record. This is the record ID, points you to the Bureau of Mines record. And you can pull this up and you can take a look at it. You can say it was site record from the Hodge mine. You can find out, well, these are things you know because you clicked on it, but what watershed it was, what commodity they mined. They mined zinc and lead, so it's primarily a zinc mine with secondary lead recovery. Sphalerite and calcite, you know, those are the ores that they mined. Tells you what rock it was in. I think everything is this age for us. I think everything was dolomite for us. But it just gives you an idea of who operated this mine and what resources they took out of it. And it's just kind of a fun thing to look at. And the other thing that's kind of fun about this is that you see some names. Like I actually think I had met Alan Agnew at one point in time, and Hale and Lyons and Bear, all these the old time geologists are in here. And you can see the other thing is, remember I told you to check on the source and the date. So these are the names of the people, who they worked for, and the date that they provided the information to this resource. So it's very well annotated, even though it might not be mapped super accurately, but it's just kind of a fascinating resource. So, and it doesn't give you every site, but I like so look at the trends, right? So this line right here will tell you that from, I think that's around Hazel, that's Southwest Road. Okay, so you can tell you that along that feature, there was a lot of mining activity. So when you take out the road, and you look at just the geologic feature, you can see that there's probably a vein along there. So there's probably more activity along that line than is showing up in this map, but that gives you an idea of where if you wanted to go look for stuff, this would be a good place to go start looking. Right, it's going to be more apt to be here than it is up here, just because of the old records. So it's just another interesting resource. It's not super accurate, but interesting for your historic exploration. And then I pulled some samples from it, and I wasn't sure about when it gets windy down here. I never know how the internet's going to be, so it's touch and go. So we pulled just some stuff from the Vinegar Hill. And then another resource, and again, these are raster maps, but these are topographic maps from generally 1920 and earlier. And again, these are all just GIS maps. And here's an example of one of them from Hazel Green's new diggings. You can see that these are buildings, and you can kind of get a sense of what roads existed at the time, and then of course the topography at the time. So again, it's an old resource. It's just another historic resource. Kind of fun to go back and look at these. I got a side story for you. What's interesting for us down here in the South is that we pull up these old maps a lot, because these maps are created by aerial photography. So an airplane flies over and they capture images and they put those together, and then they use something called stereo compilation to put the maps together. In the South, there's a plant called kudzu. And kudzu grows ubiquitously. It's everywhere. And there has been so much kudzu in a lot of remote areas that it actually hides the underlying topography, and it is so thick. So when they do LiDAR, the aerial mapping, it actually hides the topography underneath. So you might get a map and it looks like the land is perfectly flat or has a slight dip in it. And when you go out there, you'll find a 30-foot gully underneath that. And that's because the kudzu has built a bridge across that gap, and you don't know what lies underneath it. So pulling up these old topographic maps is useful. The pre-kudzu maps, I call them, is to get a sense of what the land looked like before the vegetation overtook it. All right, so that's kind of some of the federal resources. Now we talk about the state resources. Now, I happen to be in Wisconsin, which is incredibly good for us. Because Wisconsin is the pioneer of GIS data, at least for land records or for parcel data. Wisconsin was one of the founders of this technology and the use of this technology for parcel mapping. And Wisconsin was one of the early states. North Carolina and Wisconsin were two of the earliest states to have assemblies of this information statewide. And the University of Wisconsin was a real pioneer. I mean, they led the way on so many things, but in GIS in particular, in geography, they had a great geography department. If you ever heard of the Arthur Robinson and Robinson collection at UW-Madison, Arthur Robinson was a really important geographer for the country, and he was at Science Hall in Madison. But the university was not me, I just studied under the people that did this, but they laid the foundation for all this GIS stuff, and I just was fortunate enough to be at the right place at the right time. But Wisconsin has a map, and if you go to this state cartographer's office, sco.wisc.edu, they have a lot of resources. But one of the things they have is this is now the 7th version of the statewide parcel map, and they update it every year. And they take it from all the local governments and they put it all together into a single map. And we're pretty lucky to have that. We're one of the few states that have it available to us like this, and it's just a really nice resource for us to have. And you can click on any parcel, and you can see the parcel owner, what school district they're in, and the assessed value. So we actually call this cartography pornography. So a lot of people are really interested in, how much did my neighbor pay for that piece of property? Are you kidding? They paid that much? Or how come that property is worth this and mine's only worth that? You'd be surprised how much that happens. But you can do just some, this gives you an opportunity to just pan around and click on any parcel and find out whatever information is on the record for that piece of property. All public record data made available to you now by virtue of the internet, by virtue of the web. Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. I can zoom to that parcel and see it. It's pretty neat, pretty neat. So, and this is statewide. So you can check here and they can find out what's going on in Ladysmith. You can do all of that from this one portal. But the cartography of this is, I mean, the presentation, it's okay, but it's not great. It's okay. It's good. They did a good job. It's statewide, pretty awesome. But what I prefer to do is to go to the individual counties if we can. And so this is the data from the individual counties. So this is the Mining Museum, and this is Grant County. So this is Grant County has all of Southwest Wisconsin counties have very, very detailed, regularly updated aerial imagery. They have high quality parcel data. You can see this is vector data now. Those are going to be vector lines that are drawn precisely by your GIS person. They're going to show you exactly what's there, who owns it, the dimensions of it. You can go get the parcel information. You can get, of course, there won't be any tax bills here because this is the city of Platteville. Go over here and look at this one. But you can look at you can look at any parcel you want. You can see how much property tax was paid. You can see the assessed value. You can look at their tax bills. Pretty snoopy, right? Like you can get all this information. It's all public record data. But this is Grant County's parcel data portal. And the reason that this data is important for you is if you find something that you're interested in that you want to investigate, and you say, boy, I think there might be an old mine over there. I think I want to go look at that. What you need to do is you need to check and see who owns that land and figure out how to get a hold of them before you just go tromping over there. And so this is a resource for you to go check out who owns that land and is it somebody I should call before I go just tromping on that land to look at it. But this is a pretty nice. This is their portal. It's served out of Lancaster. I was telling Erik I had a little bit of trouble with the portal yesterday, and I grabbed some Friday, and I had Chris used to be the GIS person there, and I thought I had emailed Chris, but someone else responded. But they did a good job. They got me this updated data. What you're going to see here is that you see the difference in the color. So this is the Grant County aerial imagery. And that's just the boundary between the county imagery, the two counties imagery between, that would be Iowa County, and this would be Grant County. That's you always run that imagery over the county line a little bit, but then as you zoom in, you'll get the true color again. So just to give you an idea, that's just shows you the accuracy of what you're looking at. And the other thing that the photography gives you is it can kind of give you a pattern of what the landscape looks like. So if you want to go do some exploring and you want to look for some adventure, this gives you an idea of kind of some of the topography that you're going to see and some general patterns. So the counties around us are to Grant County, which is going to start here. And I was on the site for the Parcel Explorer. And when you click on the Parcel Explorer, you're going to get this disclaimer. All these sites are going to have this disclaimer. So much like the terms of service when you install an application, you just go, yeah, I've read it. I know you're not going to read it, but be aware of the fact that what they're telling you here is that this is the best effort that they've made to present this information, but don't make any legal decisions on it. So I just wanted to share this disclaimer. All the counties have this disclaimer on their sites. Let's see, Iowa County also has a GIS map. I clicked on that. Wait a minute. With Iowa County GIS map, it's hosted by an external service, but again, it's got the same information that they have Grant County, more detailed than the data that you're going to get on the statewide map, which is fine. It's going to look, my internet's slowing down, must be getting windier, but that will give you a sense of that. The Lafayette County, same kind of thing. Lafayette County has a lot of different maps that are interesting. The LIDAR is sort of a, it's the three-dimensional view of the land. If you want to go to their parcel viewer, you'd go to this to their web. So I did that already. So what I was looking at was, I thought, well, let's look at some mines I'm familiar with. So I thought, well, let me look at just some various mines and see what I can find. And so I was looking at this area in here, and this is on County W. Well, this might actually be in Illinois, but I used the websites to find the original. I found the original information on the mine site, and then I brought up the current parcel map, figured out where I was, and then zoomed in to see what it looked like today. And then that can tell you whether if there's any artifacts or anything that might be worth taking a look at or asking about. Or if you're just driving by in your car and you see that and you go, man, that looks like an old mine site. I wonder if it is. This is the kind of thing you can look at. And then the county immediately to our south, Joe Davies, also has a parcel data. Not as complete as what we have in Wisconsin. Again, here's one of these disclaimers. Yeah, I know. But it's not as their data is not as complete as our data is, but you can still get in and do some exploring on it. Let me go back to my presentation here. Maybe I grabbed some screenshots here. That would be easier to see. So let me just show you a little bit what I did here. So I started, sorry about that. Just click this way. That's Joe Davies. So what I did is I went to the Vinegar Hill mine, got some information on the Vinegar Hill mine. Look at that, 700, 800 gallons per minute. Whew, it's a lot. But the stopes were 100 feet tall. Stopes, the mining openings were 100 feet tall. Isn't that amazing? So I found it here on, this is County W, and this is where this mine was. So I thought, okay, here's where it was. I found it on the current map. Zoomed in to look at it. That might be a tailings pond, maybe. I don't know. It looks kind of, looks like it probably doesn't look particularly natural. Maybe it's an outcropping, but it looks like it might be something to be of interest. Yeah, so that's just kind of an idea of how you can use these maps to do some exploring. They're all the resources we have available to us in Wisconsin are pretty extraordinary, because we've had so many people over the years that have done such good jobs of mapping and providing these resources to us in Wisconsin. We're very fortunate. The amount of mapping that we can get at will help us with satisfy our curiosity and understand what was there at a certain time is just a wonderful asset. So that's just sort of a quick view of what we have for GIS resources that are available to us. And don't be afraid to search. Just search. But if you put that word GIS in your Google search, you'll find that you get a little better result than if you just search for just maps.
That's great, Nancy. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many maps are out there now, and they haven't necessarily been available that long either. So I think you probably excited a lot of people, including myself, to see what the latest and greatest is for each of our counties and just start drilling into all the kinds of data that are available. So that's really awesome. I was interested, you know, right out of the gate, you kind of were talking about how you thought that maps kind of help it. I'm trying to remember how you put it. It was really lovely that maps can tell us who we are as a people and what our values are. And I wondered, since you were kind of just showing us some parcel maps, United States parcel maps, if you could kind of just like compare our public land survey system here in the United States with what preceded it, and maybe to say like how the French did it, and like how did they divide up a parcel that was different from how we did it, and what did that say about them versus, say, you know, an early United States.
Well, it is kind of interesting. I don't have any images for you on that, but what's interesting is that when Jefferson was president, he wanted us to inventory the land. He wanted to know how big the country was. He didn't know. We didn't know. They didn't know how big it was. Like, hey, we just bought this thing. Like, how big is it? And so they sent surveyors out on the land to primarily to measure and inventory how much land we had, because we didn't know. And they were going to go out and measure out parcels and give them to Revolutionary War soldiers as payment, because they didn't have any money, but they had land. So they're land rich and cash poor. And that was one of the ways they were going to pay off the Revolutionary soldiers, was with land. And they went out and laid this grid out on the land, because that was the easiest way to at the time that they felt was to divide it up. But you go down but there was land that was already settled. So if the land was settled before the land surveyors came, so down on the Mississippi River, you'll see some long lots, French long lots that were along the river, and they fronted the river access was the most important thing to them, because that was their means of transportation. And so they're called the French long lots, and they're long and skinny. So there's a frontage on the water, and then they go back a long way perpendicular to the river. And when those areas were surveyed by the public land survey system surveyors, they excluded those. So those are all kind of holes in the public land survey system. And you see that up on the Fox River Valley as well. The French settled along the Fox River, and you'll see those French long lots up there. So it has to do with what resource was important to them at the time, on how they settled things, and how they defined what was important to them. I can't tell you, I live in a colonial state, a state that was not surveyed, that existed prior to Jefferson, one of the original colonies, and I don't have a clue how they surveyed down here. It just is a mystery to me. But clearly it was tied to topography. A lot of things are just tied to hilltops and valleys, and they occupied land according to to farm it or to graze it or whatever it was they wanted to do on it. And so in Pendleton, downtown has been settled since 1760s or something. And uptown, we call it uptown, there's a square, and all that stuff is actually at the highest elevation in that area. And then the housing all is below that. So it's about 100-foot elevation from my house to the town square. It's always uphill. So you are really going uptown when you go uptown. It's kind of interesting.
Indeed it is. So say I'm going to keep asking you some questions that have been coming to my mind, and all of you there at home are invited to go ahead and type in some questions should you have some. But I was wondering if, you know, with all of the digital mapping that's going on nowadays, is this a good time for somebody to get into the field of GIS?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, in my opinion, I think every profession needs to know where things are. That there is not a single profession that you don't need to know. You don't have a question of where things are. So if you go to any town meeting or any city council meeting or any local meeting, and listen carefully, and how many times does the item on their agenda have to do with where something is? A zoning change, a school district, a busing route, a road repair, water, sewer, all the decisions that are made by local government, and especially by municipal government. Every one of those has a question of where. And I always tell people that every town meeting, every council meeting should have a projection of a map for every single agenda item, because every single agenda item that we make a decision about has some kind of location information tied to it. There's just not a single decision we make that doesn't have to do something about where things are. So say we're gonna major in business. Well, I'm gonna major in business and I'm gonna become an accountant. I don't need to know where things are. Well, you go to work for Starbucks and they want to locate a new Starbucks store. Well, you're gonna have to know what's the demographics in that area. Do you have enough people that drink coffee? What are the age groups? What is the housing? What's the traffic? all that information necessary. Where's the nearest Dunkin' Donuts, so that you're not competing direct, or maybe you do want to compete directly with them, but whatever it is, where are your competitors located? And how do you locate, and what are the land values, and what lot size do you need, and how are you going to locate that? That's a business major, but those are things business majors need to know. There's just not a single profession that doesn't need to know where something is.
So one attendee is kind of interested in, you know, a certain kind of historic information, you know, which is, you know, where were some of the Ho-Chunk mines located? You know, I know from my memory that some of that information might be found, say, on the Chandler map. And so maybe this kind of relates to matters of like, what kind of historic maps have already been scanned? How would we know which historic maps have been scanned and georeferenced and could be made available on publicly available mapping software? Is there like a big database, you know, at the state cartographer's office? Is there a chance that you could, you know, that someone at home would be able to just like flip on and off Chandler map to try to figure out where the old Ho-Chunk mines were?
You know, that's a really good question, and I don't know. I don't know. There's not that's the problem, is there's a lot that needs to be done.
Right.
To inventory what's available. And we don't, I mean, and that would be an interesting thing for the mining museum to be able to provide people, as a list of internet resources that are available. I really don't know of a catalog of all available, you know, of all the records that have been scanned. I personally don't know of that. Perhaps the Wisconsin, we need an archivist or a librarian, because they would be able to tell us, and they'd be able to help us find that information. But I don't directly know of any place where that, where, is that spelled correctly? No.
Well, here's another question for you. So if, you know, because we can only really rely on the state or county publicly available web-based GIS databases to be, you know, only so detailed, the amateur who loves maps and wants to, you know, find out things like, okay, where we're all, you know, let's map where the Ho-Chunk mines were located and so forth, you know, are there kinds of software that, you know, have come down in price a little bit, so that like today, if somebody wanted to kind of like not buy, you know, a license for ESRI software, you know, which is super expensive, but like could an amateur just like afford something at home and just start playing around with maps?
Yeah, there is. There's a couple of things that you could do. If you didn't want to just use the web maps, right? So there's a lot of things you can do on the web maps. So on any one of these sites, on the Grant County site, you can measure things, you can make a printing of it, you can download it. There's a lot of different tools that you can use within this web-based map. You can turn layers on and off, you can get the soils data. There's a lot of information that you can get. But if you don't want to, if you want to do it yourself, you want to learn how to do it yourself, the trick is the learning curve. They don't make this easy, right? They don't, it's not in their enlightened self-interest to make this super easy to use. But there's a couple of options. There is available for free a software called QGIS. And it is available for free. And it works very similar. It's a public domain software, and it's definitely free. You can download it. It runs on a Mac, it runs on a PC. I've installed it, I've run it. It's pretty intuitive, not super intuitive, but reasonably intuitive, but it does have a lot of online tutorials. So if you want to get these data sets and begin to start using them, this QGIS is one option. The other option is that if you want to use the ESRI software and you don't want to spend a fortune on it, I didn't tell you this, but you can get a home use license that you can use for $100 a year. And that is the full ESRI suite. That's the ArcGIS, the ArcGIS Pro. It's the whole thing. Just don't get this and start consulting with it. But if you want to get this for your personal use, just to start getting a sense of what GIS can do and how you can use it, it's $100 a year. And that's the full $7,000 suite. And that's the whole suite.
Wow.
And it's just an annual fee. And at the museum, if you're a museum, I think you can get I think they have a nonprofit option that's even less than that. But that's why it's not as expensive as people think it is if you just want to get it for personal use, just for fooling around. It's not free, but it's way less expensive than the.
Well, that's really neat. So, so what folks might do, say, if you've got a parcel of land, or maybe some folks have a big parcel of land out here in Wisconsin, some folks have farms. And so you could almost start mapping your own place, couldn't you? Like, let's say you wanted to do that. Like, let's make a map of your farm. What are some kinds of data sets that some people might start pulling together for like their own private maps?
Well, if it was me, first thing I'd do is I'd go to the county I was in. This would be Lafayette County, and I'd call my county GIS professional and tell them, hey, I want to make a map of my county. What do you have for me? And I would see what they already had. So they're going to have just a lot of stuff. You're going to want zoning, you're going to want soils, you're going to want to know the parcel data. You may or may not want the geology, depending on what it is you're trying to do. You might want historic land use, any number of those data sets. You're going to get all that data together for you first. And if you're a farmer, if you're on the farm, you probably have a farm plan. So you want to contact USDA and ask for a digital copy of your farm plan. And they should be able to give you the maps that went into actually building your farm, which in which cases I think the USDA still will give you all of the historic plans, as well as all of the crops that you had. So you would know, like, the yield, the crop and the yield historically that the USDA has captured for your land, which would be really useful, I would think. You could find out when the contours were put in, if you had contour farming, and those are probably put in the 30s, but you could find all that out. And I would contact my agriculture extension agent, which should be by county. At least they are by county down here. And then the other thing that your county extension agent can give you, I'm pretty sure they can give it to you. I know they can give it here, so if they can give it here, I'm sure they can give it in Wisconsin, is vegetation map. So you can get current and historic vegetation maps. So you can get they'll actually give you that. And then you're on your own, right? Then you can take your phone, whether you get that $100 Arc Map application, it comes with data collector. You can go out with your cell phone, walk around, map whatever you want. This is where I got the deer last year. This is where I'm going to put the corn out for them this year. This is where I'm planning on putting my stand in. Here's where my camera is. You can start tracking where they're coming through your property if you're into that sort of thing. You're going to put up some fencing. You decide you want to put the cattle here, and you want to put the beef cattle here and sheep here, or whatever you're doing. You can begin to lay out your own things. Or you find an arrowhead, you want to map it. You take a picture of it, get a point on it, and say, I found it here.
I know my Aunt Ethel was always interested in mapping where the wild asparagus patches were, because every year she'd forget where they were, and then we'd always try to find them again. So you can map that, eh?
Yep. You can do that with your phone if you wanted to.
Okay. Say Clark was kind enough to refer us in the Q&A function to the National Mind Map Repository, which has a listing of scanned mind maps for Wisconsin. So if you guys at home want to kind of open that up, and you can bookmark that and check that out later. Thank you so much for sharing that. Looks like there's probably some cool maps there to explore also. Oh, and you're pulling it up in real time. Cool. Let's see what they've got.
So
Grant
we
County.
can, yeah, so we could, I could see the mining museum becoming a place where people go to find stuff, couldn't you? I can see that happening.
I could see us getting there. Yeah, you know, we get a lot of phone calls already where people in town, either because they've got a little sinkhole developing in their property, or they're just kind of curious to know, are there any mines on their land. You know, we kind of refer them to whatever data sets we're familiar with, but over time, you know, maybe we could try to build up our uh, uh, inventory of other maps to share.
Well, they found the Vinegar Hill mine, so that's good. Glad everybody can find the Vinegar Hill mine.
Yeah, so there's a remarkable amount of information then, you know, that's available there. And you wonder, you know, if there are, in some cases, there might be extra attachments. Like, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting to tie in surface rights and mineral right ownership then to these different mine properties?
And that's one of the things that is a neat idea, because you know it's kind of uniquely us is the we separate rights, right? So you can own, one person can own the surface, another person can own the subsurface, and it's a bundle of rights in the sense that they can be separated, and that's pretty unique to our way of managing land. And most county GIS tax, municipal and county GIS mapping don't do the subsurface. They only manage the surface, because researching and identifying all subsurface rights is sometimes hard. But yeah, that would be pretty cool. That would be a good project for somebody.
Amy Haig, do you remember Amy Haig, Nancy?
I do. We were best buds.
Well, she's got a question, actually a comment here. She says her dad had a collection of plat maps we used to find and in visiting old church cemeteries in rural Grant County in the 70s. It seems like the GIS maps are an amazing evolution of these old paper versions. Most of this is over my head, she says, but as a historian who started out loving local history and maps, this is fascinating, and thanks for sharing, old friend. Well, isn't that nice?
Good to hear from you, Amy.
Nancy, maybe could you remind us who Amy's father was?
Oh yeah, Amy's father was and mom, Jack and Grace Haig. They were in Platteville all my life. Jack ran the New Jersey zinc operation and was very public oriented, and was on the original board of the museum, I think, not the original, very early on at the museum. And I know his knowledge of mining was something Tommy relied on a lot when he was curator. Jack would never hesitate to come down and spend an afternoon with us and explain things to us, or we'd find something or somebody would donate something and Jack would drop down and explain it to us. He had very patient and knowledgeable fellow. Miss him. He's a good guy.
I didn't have the pleasure of meeting him, but I read that when New Jersey Zinc closed the smelter in Illinois at Depew, that then immediately Wisconsin operations shut down. And what did he do in his spare time? Well, he started volunteering at the museum, and he designed the 9-hole drill campaign to rediscover the Bevins mine in the backyard and help get that all permitted and set up. So that was, you know, really amazing.
That is amazing.
Okay, now we've got another question here, or some comments here from a viewer. For the rural area where we have a farm, a GIS map shows that the headwaters for a creek is located in one of our valleys. The creek runs into the Wisconsin River. However, that valley is bone dry and has no water that we've ever seen. There are 2 neighboring valleys on our property that do have springs that run downhill. We're told we've told the GIS map makers, but haven't been able to get the map changed. Okay, so how do map makers indicate running versus non-running features, ephemeral streams?
That's a real specialty, right? So that's part of something called the I would suspect, I don't know which county you're in, but There, what you're probably seeing is the National Hydraulic, the National Hydraulic Database. And so that's a specialized thing. The NHD, it's called National Hydraulic Database. And they define what is an intermittent stream and what is a consistently running stream. And it's a very specific science that does that. And I agree that those things change over time. And I'm looking to the National Hydrologic Data Set, Hydrography Data Set. So, and the problem with it is resolution. So at the national level, of course, they can't see all the intermittent streams that we can see. And as we drill down to the state level, we have a lot more detail. And then when you're actually the person with boots on the ground, you can say, hey, that is a valley, but the stream is so intermittent, it only has rain runoff. The spring is actually located over here. And that is something that has to come through, as far as I know, has to come through the National Hydrography Data Set. And I'm not sure that, I think you can add data to it through the National Hydrography Data Set. Because there's, and I know they're doing an update process of it right now called the 3D hydrography program. A friend of mine is running that program, but I don't know how you can, it might be more complicated than you think to actually add information to it. But if I were you, I would reach out to these people, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be responsible for getting things input. Your county person doesn't have the authority to update the National Hydrography Data Set unless they're operating under a grant that's sanctioned by the National Hydrography Data Set people. Unless your local county has a hydrography data set that they're managing themselves. But I would go to these guys. I would go to the hydroad@usgs.gov, tell them what you found out, and tell them that you want to know more about it and that you believe your map needs to be corrected.
That's it. See, that would have taken us a long time to get to the bottom of. Thank you, Nancy. That was awesome.
Well, I mean, it depends on the county, it depends on your GIS person, and I appreciate that they're not going to be able to, that your county GIS person doesn't have that authority, but you know, don't give up, don't give up. And I would also look for the Wisconsin. I don't know if Wisconsin has their own hydrography set. We do in South Carolina, but I can't remember if Wisconsin, you know, hydrography. I think there might be one in Wisconsin as well, but I do not know for sure. Well, they do. And they have open data. Oh, try here. Try these guys.
Rivers, lakes, and streams data at the State Cartographer's Office of the UW-Madison.
That's that's what I would do.
There you go.
There you go. See, and here they're going to tell you that some counties have their own mapping projects. So I don't know which counties have that or not. But see, they're back to the National Hydrography Data Set. But maybe reach out to State Cartographer's Office, because they're usually pretty helpful if they have time. But geodata, you know, is always a good. Go to SCO, Wisconsin State Cartography is wis.edu, and then look for this hydrography data set, and go ahead and let them know about the issue, because they're going to want to know that. People are going to want to know where the springs are. That's really an important piece of data, because it affects groundwater, affects a lot of things. It's very, very important. Wetlands, a lot of things are affected by stream data. So I'm sure they're going to want to know more about that. So if you have the time and energy, I'd encourage you to reach out, at least reach out and let them know. It's a start.
Well, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Now, Mike B has got a question. He says the info you've presented is very helpful, Nancy. And have you seen frequent disputes over property boundary discrepancy issues that result from evolving mapping technology? So he says that he is a former student that pulled chains on weekends with DC Dixon.
Oh yeah.
He sees frequent reliance on ancient fence lines that relied on 1920s technology? Is there a path to resolution?
That's a tough question. Good on you, Mike, for surveying with Mr. Dixon. That was certainly you and Chip Millman. I can just see you all out there pulling chains. That's great. A memory to be treasured for sure. He was one of the first land surveyors I knew, and he's a real special guy. I think that I don't see as much discrepancy as you might expect. So certainly the old 1920s technology was not as accurate as our technology, and the GPS is, accurate to sub-meter, and the 20s was, could be accurate, but it's not going to be. It's going to be, 10 feet. If you did it really well. Now, Mr. Dixon, I'm not saying Mr. Dixon's work is plus or minus 10 feet. I don't mean to say that at all. He probably got it really close, but it had a lot of human variables, how tightly you pulled the chain, and did you remember to count all the chain lengths, and did you really go in a straight line, and did you account for the uphill and downhill, did you really get it level? There were just a lot of variables in that. But now we skip over all that, and we just take a GPS unit and throw it right on the monument, and boom, that's it. In the end, what matters is where the pipe is in the ground. It doesn't matter what the measurement is. It doesn't matter how closely you can measure the distances. What matters is where that pipe in the ground is. And so the question is, how accurately can we locate that pipe in the ground? Now, there are disputes about where the pipe is. Don't get me wrong. There's people that go, oh, I think the pipe is here. And no, it's over here. This is the original monument. That's the original monument. There's always going to be those kind of disputes. But I don't see, even with the Bureau of Land Management, where they did the whole Western United States with very, very, primitive technology, and they were, chased by wild animals and affected by snowstorms and any number of things that caused them to have inaccurate surveys, not the least of which was probably a little bit of whiskey at night. But those, when we've gone back and resurveyed those, if we find the pipe they put in the ground, even if it's in the wrong place, the correct pipe in the wrong place is the most important thing. You always say that that's what, because that's what controls where the property is. And so when you look at the public land survey system out west, you go, oh, it's all supposed to be 1 mile by 1 mile. It's not 1 mile by 1 mile. It's approximately 1 mile by 1 mile, but it's where the surveyor ended up and put the pipe in the ground. That's what matters. So I don't see a lot of issue in terms of resolving the differences in that. I see problems in understanding why the line isn't where we mathematically predict it to be. I see problems with people not agreeing to which pipe is the correct one. And fences move. I mean, every state that I know of has a legal position that's called a fence watcher or a fence adjudicator to help, because fences move. Fences never, they move all the time. They're not stationary objects by any stretch, except in New England where they're built out of rocks. But when they're fence, I mean, they move. People reestablish them, and you re-pull them, and you set in new posts, and they wander. And a fence watcher or a fence adjudicator can help you resolve where the fence should be. But yeah, I think it's astounding what good work was done under very primitive conditions. And it's astounding what good work modern surveyors can do in retracing those steps.
Excellent. Okay, Tom and Kay wanted to share that another classmate of ours, Chris Gents Frederick, had a mother who mapped the cemeteries of the area. So are there still things that people could map? Are there still things out there that need mapping?
Oh yeah, there's always something that needs mapping. In my town right now, we need to map sidewalks, for crying out loud. This drives me crazy. Like, nobody knows where the sidewalks are. We don't know what condition they're in. It just drives me nuts. I spent Friday afternoon trying to help the utility man figure out where the sewer line was. I mean, it's just ridiculous, the things that we don't, of the built environment, that we don't know where it is, and to say nothing of the natural environment. So one of the things that we're dealing with down here is an invasive plant species. It's called it's a pear tree, and they're lovely, and they have beautiful white blooms, and they bloom beautifully in the summer, in the spring, and they're really nice to see because they hail the beginning of spring. But they're non-native, so they're much like the kudzu. They've gone wild, and they've populated a lot of areas, and then they're not particularly strong because they grow very quickly, and they're not native, and so they split and then they fall and they create problems because they grow fast and they collapse. And so what we'd like to do is get maps of those pear trees, so that, because the program at the extension right now is to get them out, is to remove them. So the extension wants to get them cut down, and they're going to replace them with native species, replace them with dogwood, or replace them with something that's native, that will be more hardy, that will still give you lovely flowers, but won't be such a nuisance. So that would be a neat thing to map, you know, like where all the non-native species. Yeah, and cemeteries are a good one. Like, you think all the cemeteries are mapped, they're not mapped. There are a lot of family cemeteries that were never mapped, that are on farmsteads, that were never mapped. And I think a lot of original American sites and original American heritage has not been mapped. Now, I know we're careful about mapping that and making it public, because we don't want the sites to be robbed or to be taken advantage of. So there's some concern about that. But I think there's a lot of original American sites that are unmapped. Walking tours. How many towns have walking tours, and they want to, you know, make a map of the walking tour? How many Eagle Scout projects have gone on in Platteville? Every Eagle Scout I know has done a civic project of some sort. Do we have a record of those? Where were those, and where are they now? That would be pretty interesting to see where all of those were in the past. So yeah, no limit. Anything we can observe, we can map, and it's just that over time our priorities have changed and who we are has changed. And so the things we didn't observe in the 50s and 60s, and Amy, even when we were out trudging around in the 70s, the things that we saw then are not the same things we would see now. Like now we might be looking for butterfly milkweed habitat, or we might be looking for bee habitat. And those would have been things, as you know, high school students in the 70s, we may not have paid attention to. And so, so we didn't observe it because it wasn't important to us. But now there are things that are important to us. And so the things we're observing now need to be mapped. Things that are now important to us need to be mapped. And of course, internationally, you know, minefields, there's a big effort to map abandoned mines, not lead and zinc mines, land mines. It's a big project to get those mapped. The UN has a big initiative on those. So yeah, everything needs to be mapped.
And sometimes it's a matter of life and death.
Yep.
Well, I thought that was a really profound, some profound thoughts, and a really kind of neat, deep way to wrap up your wonderful presentation on mapping. And I think you really helped to bring that subject to life for us, and makes me want to kind of go out and do some mapping or make some new maps and make them available through the museum. And thank you ever so much. Now, I hope that Nancy, you'll consider joining us next week, and all of you at home, I hope that you'll consider tuning in next week, same time, Sunday at 5 for the last Winter Lyceum. That's going to be Luke Sprague, who is the oral historian for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum in Madison. He is going to be giving us essentially a quick beginner's level training for anybody who wants to conduct oral history interviews. So oral history interviewing theory, processing, and techniques. I hope you'll consider joining us. We thank you so much, Dr. Nancy von Meyer. Thanks to all of you who tuned in tonight, and goodbye.
Thank you, Erik.